So today's devotion is going to feel just a little different. I have a plan in the local church that I can talk about on a broad scope here, but I don't feel like it's appropriate on the internet to do this through the devotion. When I was preparing for this week, there's a verse in the New Testament that I'm going to read in just a few moments, but I was thinking along the context of, do we take enough time to reflect on what we just finished? You know, in the Old Testament, we see a people that were really good at feasts. They had celebrations to remind them of what took place. Feast of Passover, of unleavened bread, of first fruits, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles or Tents. They had many celebrations where they looked back and acknowledged what God did. And that acknowledgement wasn't just God did this, but it helped them in their today, and it prepared them for their tomorrow. They were feasts that were passed on for generations. That practice of remembering. You know, when the calendar switches, it's so hard because even as a pastor, I want to engage in where are we going this year, and what are we going to accomplish, and what are we going to get done, and what does God have for us, and how are we going to get there? And I'll get there as a pastor. We're going to look ahead. But before we look ahead, I feel compelled that we pause and look back. Look back at 2022 and see, specifically in our context here, what has God done through the body of Christ here in Crawford, Nebraska? What has He allowed us to accomplish? What has He allowed us to do? This practice can be seen in a story found in Luke 17. While he was on the way to Jerusalem, he was passing between Samaria and Galilee, and as he entered a village, 10 men with leprosy who stood at a distance met him. They raised their voices, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." Verse 14 says, when he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they were going, they were cleansed. Now one of them, when he saw he'd been healed, he turned back, glorifying God with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at his feet, giving thanks to him. And he was a Samaritan. You see, this leper, this Samaritan leper, had a discipline that I believe is imperative for every child of God. Like I said, so often we're consumed with what's next that we forget about what God has done. We want to move on to the new, the brighter, the better things, but we don't truly reflect on what was. The leper turned back. He went back to the point he met Jesus. He went and glorified God. It brought praise in his life because he could see what God has done. I believe that in your life, God's done some remarkable things in the last year. I believe in your home, He's done remarkable things. I believe in your church, wherever you attend, God has done remarkable things. We just have to stop and think. To allow ourselves to reflect upon what was. Because when we see what was, it brings glory inside of us. As a pastor, I'm able to see things, and I know what all the church body accomplishes, and sometimes I don't do a very good job sharing with the church. End of the year, I look at all these numbers, I look at what is, and I look back at what was accomplished, and I'm in awe of all that our church in Crawford, Nebraska was able to accomplish because of God's grace in love in us and through us. When I look at the home missionaries we're able to invest in, or the foreign missionaries we're able to invest in, when I see that this church in Crawford, Nebraska is able to be a part of ministry literally across the world, in Asia, in Eurasia, in the Mideast, in Africa, all over the world, we get to be a part. When I look at what our church was able to accomplish within our community, the outreaches and the things in which we set our mind and hearts to, I'm in awe of all that we were able to do. You see, God designed the body of Christ, and when He designed it, He made it in such an incredible way that when we come together, I know this is the pastor thing to say, oh, get involved in a church or be a part of a church body. It's important because it's incredible when we see what happens as we come together. Ephesians 4, so Christ Himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, teachers to equip His people for works of service, so the body of Christ may be built up until we reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves, blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of Him who is the head, that is Christ. From Him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. That's the season I get to see. The beauty of the body of Christ. The things in which we accomplished as a body here in Crawford, we couldn't accomplish alone. The outreach, the missional impact, the place in which God has us and what we're seeing Him do. I couldn't do it alone. We couldn't do it alone. There's not one that could do it. But when we come together, it's the beauty of the body that's grown up into the head that is Jesus Christ. When we come together, we see remarkable things happen. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. There was a man all alone. He had neither a son or brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. From whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Verse 9 says 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. It's incredible what we can accomplish when we come together. As a pastor, I want to look back in our context of all that was accomplished as a body in what He has done in us and through us. In your life, I want you to recognize where you are, how you fall in line with the body of Christ, and what strength He's brought to you by those that are around you, and the things that you've been able to accomplish because you're a child of God, and you grow up into the head, which is Jesus Christ. The incredible things that can only be done because of Him in you and through you. The Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face shine upon you, be gracious to you, may turn His face toward you, grant you His peace. And may you turn back and watch a spirit of praise grow inside of you. Be blessed.